This is Big Man Tyrone, and you're about to watch the MtG Cabal cast with your hosts, Woad, Thirsty, and Reptar. Sub to us on all your podcast networks at MtG Cabal Cast and YouTube.
All right. Hey, guys. Welcome to the newest episode of the Cabal cast. You got Rep and I holding it down as usual lately. Going to be a pretty general episode today. We're touching on the 9-0 list from day one of GP Toronto, how coverage has changed a little bit. There's one in particular we're going to talk about, the Boros Soldiers Humans list. And then we're actually going to cover a general topic that, honestly, I don't think a lot of people fully understand in MTG finance and arbitrage, and how to exploit it, ways to exploit it, and what it means. So with that, we'll get started.
Yep. So last night, Saturday at some point in time, we got the 9-0 deck lists from Channel Fireball tweeted out. And we see what looks like a standard mix in Tron, Amulet Titan, Izzet Phoenix, Humans, and Death Shadow. And then we have a couple of interesting takes. We have Bring to Light Scapeshift, which is a deck that existed months, if not years ago. A deck that has been powered up by Growth Spiral, allowing it to play almost an entirely instant-based game. We have 4-color Whir, and for people who are not in on this joke, it is basically Lantern Control, but your win conditions are Ipnu Rivulet, a single copy of the Mill Land from Amonkhet, and Pyrite Spellbomb. And you just lock out the game with Trinisphere, you lock out Combat with Ensnaring Bridge, and then you have Whir to basically bring all these pieces together. Boros Soldiers, which we'll bring up the deck list for in a moment. We only have the 60 that was tweeted this morning.
Yeah.
And Adnaz. And Adnaz is also interesting because this can come in multiple flavors. You can have a version that just tutors through the deck, and basically, instead of using Adnaz, I forgot the name of the black tutor from Mirrodin.
Spoils of the Vault.
Spoils of the Vault, that's it, where you just name a card, go through your deck until you find that card, exile those cards, take damage equal to, or lose life equal to the amount of cards you exile. It's pretty quick that way. Or you can kind of Glittering Wish combo, where you put something like Bring to Light, Fracturing Gust, and some other odds and ends into your sideboard that allow you to play a much more robust Game 1 while still being able to combo thanks to Bring to Light. And it creates an interesting picture of the modern metagame right now, thanks to these last two RAV sets. However, the Red-White Soldiers list that I have up now basically added nothing new. This is just a pet deck. The only additions are Tithe Taker, which are copies of Thalia, Garden of Thraben in this list. I believe 4 through 7. 4, 5, 6, yep.
Yeah.
And Field Marshal. That's not a new card, but it's basically a new inclusion to a semi-aggressive Humans list.
Mm-hmm.
And it went 9-0 overnight. I believe he finished not just outside of top 8, a little further down. But
yeah, I think it was round 14 or something that he ended up dropping.
Yeah, he basically exited the event fairly late. I believe that's still money.
Yeah.
And what we saw from this was a Field Marshal spike. And this has been mentioned on the MTG Finance subreddit. And something we keyed in on pretty early, but we didn't key in on non-foils. What we noticed was that the spread on foils was rather small.
Yeah.
This is a card that was printed originally in Cold Snap and then again in 10th edition. So we have a very limited pool.
Yeah, and the Cold Snap foils especially was where the spread was bad. It was like $5 for non-foils and $6 for foils. Mm-hmm. And now looking at it on TCG, it went from, I think I mentioned that in the Discord at like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And now we're down to from 6 pages then to 1 page where everything has $3 shipping or more.
Yep.
So it's all 10 plus. We'll see how it goes. It was just an interesting thing that I saw. And then the spread on 10th was actually what you would expect. It was about a 2x multiplier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they're sitting at around 10, and they've lost about 4 pages of foils as well.
Yeah.
So
whether or not this deck picks up, we're not sure. This is, like I said, it's basically another Humans list. I believe every creature in this list has subtype Human, including the Kytheons.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw the low-hanging fruit disappear in Field Marshal because, like I said, it was a Cold Snap original printing and then a 10th edition reprint. And then after that, we don't have a lot of other small run creatures. Everything else kind of hits around that time period after Return to Rav, where print runs just kind of ballooned out. You can't look at Cavern of Souls and Mutavaults and say, oh, these are short print run cards, because and they'll spike because these are in a number of other decks that are propping up the price right now.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is Field Marshal also has EDH propping up its price because it's a tribal lord.
Yes, it does. It is a Soldier Lord. It gives +1/+1 in first strike. It's hard to see in the image we brought up, but it is there. The other card that might see a bump is Tithe Taker, because nothing else is really using it right now. I believe the Azorius aggro list in Standard only has one copy somewhere in the 75. This deck runs 4. So we might see a bump up from not a seemingly bold price on the card, but to something a little more real, maybe around the $2.50 to $3 range on this card.
Yeah.
Especially as Azorius aggro picks up, if it does in Standard. This will be another feather in the cap of a price increase for this card.
Yeah.
And before that, this week, that's kind of the bigger piece of information that we had. We saw something interesting happen over at Star City Games, if people are paying attention to the finance subreddit, which is kind of a toss-up. If you do, you don't. Not a bad thing if you don't, not a great thing if you do. But,
there.
What we saw again this week was a jump in an EDH card price in Skullclamp, a card we talked about last week when comparing it to Lightning Greaves.
Yep.
And we saw Star City Games reach out into Europe, particularly MKM, and buy several hundred copies of Skullclamp. And this is a copy that I've got up now of their order. And you can see the buyer was Star City Games. The seller for this particular order was Eureka Games out of Europe. And they picked up about 200 copies on the whole of various non-Darksteel printings.
Yeah. Pretty crazy.
We can't really speak to why, because Star City Games is not the largest EDH vendor. It could be a sale coming up. When they've reached out to Europe in the past, they haven't really kind of given off signs that this is going to be an upcoming sale or something they're going to move into. This could just be a card they're low on. And because the events they run are mainly constructed in Modern and Standard, they don't see a lot of EDH players walking in with cards like this. This card's banned in every format that isn't EDH and Vintage, so it's very hard to find that kind of information.
Yeah.
But the reason we wanted to bring this up wasn't just because Star City is reaching into MKM for this stuff. It's because about the arbitrage opportunity that this presented for Star City Games. And in Europe, a lot of people there just don't care about EDH. They don't care about promos. And this isn't something that you can just take a guess on and see, or just watch trends and see. You can talk to vendors that play both in the US and in the EU, and they all move promos from the EU and EDH cards from the EU over to North America. Face-to-Face Games did this. They bought out the WMCQ Thalias when they came out and they were in Europe. They buy out as many promos and EDH cards as they can to bring over and sell to a larger audience over here in North America. And there's just this interesting world that a lot of people don't really think about because they don't have access to. But this is something that's been happening for a while. Jason dug in a bit and noticed that the Star City account was created in December of 2011, right?
And they have 25,000 purchases, 0 sales.
Correct.
So this account is literally just, and you can look at it, name Ben Bleiweiss, email address Ben at Star City Games. It's straight Star City Games.
And for reference, the address that's attached to this is basically just either a forwarding service or a house of somebody that they know in Europe that just moves this stuff back to them. Or Star City sends an employee every now and again to gather it all and fly it back. Yeah.
And it's the type of thing that, when Reptar and I dug in and we looked at the timeline of what was going on, this was right after Innistrad, before Dark Ascension was when they made their account. Mm-hmm. So it was after Snapcaster appeared, before we got Huntmaster. And at that point was around the time that Wizards basically said, forget Legacy, we're done with it. Mm-hmm. And, my belief, and I wasn't paying attention then, was that's a perfect opportunity for them to then come in and say, all right, well, if we're going to prop this format up, we need dual lands. And we're setting the price in the States, so let's go where they're cheap in Europe, where there's a huge supply, bring them on back. Mm-hmm. And it just makes sense. And it was an opportunity that was there that they exploited, and courtesy of, the two biggest sites for single sales right now, you've got TCG and MKM for the US and EU respectively. Both of them only ship within their own continent. So a lot of times you can find stuff like Star City clearly does skull clamps or something. Obviously a bad example here because it's not like it's sold out everywhere. But you can find something that is insanely cheap in the EU and it's expensive in the States. Like cradles, I think, are 200 or less in the EU for the most part. Well, they're 300 here in the States.
Oh, yeah.
That's basically getting them for buy list. You just have to pay for shipping, and if you have someone who handles arbitrage, whatever their, service fee is.
Yep.
And it's something that, one of the fallouts from GPs going the way they are, where they try to be a smaller, more regional thing, is if there's vendors from other areas like China or Japan or the EU where these cards are having a premium. I mean, I said it on a previous episode, my SDCC sets last year went to one of the European vendors.
Yep.
Because they couldn't get them there. And if the focus is that, then suddenly the layman can get access to arbitrage, because you can take a look just through a simple internet search. What products don't they have over there? All right, well, they don't have SDCC stuff. So if I get one, I can take it to a nearby GP and just give it to a vendor and make money.
Yep.
And, something that we've done in the past is we have a guy in the Cabal who handles a lot of arbitrage for us. When we hit Pendrell Mists, I bought something like 200 copies through him from MKM, because that's one of the things that you want to have stick is, all right, well, this is an EDH card that's cheap over there. Let's arbitrage it from Europe over to the States, where the price at the time was $5 and it shot up to $15. And it's interesting to see, because a lot of times people just don't think there's an opportunity for them here. But, both of us are saying there is. You just need to know where to look.
Yes. And it's difficult. You need to figure out ahead of time what your out is. So, Pendrell Miss is a card that arbitraged over from the EU, and we pretty much knew exactly what our out was. We knew a number of vendors that would buy that card at a decent amount because it's reserve list and they have an audience. I personally have arbitraged EDH cards. I believe in 2016, 2017, right around there, I moved over from Europe, about 30 Oracles of Moldiah, about a dozen Aura Shards, Cloud Key, and Mycosynthletus, because those are all EDH cards and do nothing in Europe. And I was able to turn them here in cases on TCG Player and on eBay for probably 1.5 to 2x what I bought them for at the time, depending on the card. Oracles, at that time, I think were about 25, 28 here, depending on what was going on. And it took me a very long time to decide on those cards. I went through EDH Rec and I poured over every color combination, and I looked at probably the top 20 cards in each one of those color combinations, threw it in an Excel spreadsheet, pulled up TCG Player, found at this point TCG low, mid, high existed. There was no market. So I found the TCG mid on each one of those, found the MKM price on them, quantity on them, and then made my decision from there. And of those several hundred cards, I only moved over the ones I listed, and I still have a backlog of a ton more that I probably will move over in time. But but remind me that this was, almost a week's worth of research just to pare down to 5 cards at quantity under 100 total. Yeah. But the opportunity was there. Yeah.
And, having your out, knowing, all right, these are the vendors I'm going to. Mm-hmm. Another one that recently I've had actually pretty good luck with has been CardSphere, because CardSphere is actually international. So you can just do it, no problem. And it's interesting because there's some people on there that are over in Europe, and they constantly send us EDH cards. Mm-hmm. They send us expeditions, and it's every single week. We'll get a package from them that's like $700 to $1,000 because it's so cheap for them over there that they're just like, well, I'm making at least 20 to 30% doing this. Get it out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And it's, if you get a chance to get on that site and check it out, I definitely recommend seeing what some of the offers are, because there's stuff, like some of the senders or receivers, I guess, that are in Japan and China where duels are propped up right now, you can do really well there just by sending them to them when they're on their wants.
Oh, yeah.
And, some of that information isn't available to know, like, all right, these areas are propping this up because as far as I know, outside of Haruruya, there's not a really big website for singles for that hemisphere.
There's Tokyo MTG, but it's only in Japanese.
Oh,
You've
right.
got to use Google Translate. So if you're using Chrome, you can just auto-translate, but then you're going to get the Google machine translated version of that site. It is not pretty.
No, it is not. I've been there. But yeah, so just doing a little bit of research and getting access, because there's, you think about the formats that are popular here in the States. We've got modern and standard. Mm-hmm. Well, when you look at MKM's website and you see what formats their MKM series is, legacy, everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Legacy. And that's, it's bad because I love legacy, but you can't play it here. But over in Europe, they don't have a problem. So you can get rid of legacy cards to those vendors, to people over there, and just get an insane margin on them compared to what you can necessarily get them for in the States. Mm-hmm. Not to mention, for me personally, and it may be different for you, Rep, I've had a problem moving duels lately. They're not as liquid as they used to be. And it's not just the price drop for the holidays. It's just, I'm sitting on, I think, 17 or 18 now with a mixture of blue duels that I just can't move.
The legacy scene by me has basically died down. People are shifting over to Canlander, so they're having a hard time buying into that format. And I've only had one person reach out to me for duels, and it was a Tega and a Trop. A Tega and a Valk. And then he handbrake 180'd into a Plateau. So that's where I am. But Galactus Games out of Italy was at Grand Prix New Jersey. So I thought about arbitraging some of my duels out to them. The only problem with that is if you have a chance to sit down with Galactus, consider yourself lucky. They have one buyer and an infinite line.
Yep.
So you basically have to get there ASAP in the morning or stand in a forever long line. Yeah.
That's actually who I offloaded my SDCC stuff to. Mm-hmm. There's them and one other vendor, I believe it's not face-to-face, it's Wenzel's company. Can't remember what they're called, but those are the two big... Yeah.
Triple Play?
Those are the two that I recommend people go to out of Europe. Those guys at both booths, again, though, they're kind of limited on buyers, so you got to get there early, but they're definitely the guys to go to for that stuff.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then you have other interesting arbitrage opportunities through companies like 95 MTG. And 95 MTG basically started as a way for Saito to move cards into the U.S. from Japan and vice versa fairly easily without having to come over. Yeah. And while that relationship doesn't really exist anymore, 95 MTG still arbitrages the cards that they buy over to Saito in Japan. So anything new that's been reprinted, they pay a premium on compared to older versions. So not this Grand Prix New Jersey, but the previous, I unloaded my Theros Thoughtseize and my KTK fetches for probably 20 or 30% over market compared to everybody else. And they are basically a cash-only business, which is amazing that they pay that much more in cash than other people do, even in credit. So understanding that is also really good, and their website, I believe, is finally back up and functioning. So if you have
it is.
If you have a chance to buy a list to them when you're going to a Grand Prix, I would recommend checking out anything you're looking to get rid of for Modern and Standard. I don't think they were paying the most on Krasis that weekend, but they were the most consistent on price. People were moving around on that card all weekend. But if you wanted a decent, rock-solid price on Krasis, they were the people to go to. They were also the only people that on their hot list have dual lands, because they arbitrage into Japan, which is a legacy hotbed right now.
Yeah.
If you want legacy tech, you go there. The gentleman that top-aided the Star City Open, I believe he was a legacy player on Ryan Overturf's team that played Grixis Phoenix, got his list from Japan. So he called out Haruruya's site as the one that he got that list from.
Yeah.
And these guys pay fairly well on dual lands and other legacy staples.
Yeah, they're definitely good to go to, and that's another thing that, not a lot of people necessarily know that was how that started, but it's something that has been going on in the industry for years.
Yep.
And now that the resources are there for the layman to get in on it, it's a really good opportunity. I mean, I mentioned last week I was looking at middle school foils. There were some that were more expensive in Europe already than they were in America. And that's the type of opportunity that, like, all right, well, if that's what they are in Europe, it generally lends itself to the belief that the price will stick in the States. Because if you see something in Europe or Japan that's got a 20 to 30% premium, then it should at least be that, because the vast majority of the vendors out there start in the States and go out. So it's a lot more common to see stuff arbitraged out than in. Because a lot of times the GP vendors, they're not like you and I, where we have a community that plays EDH. That we're going to bring these awful EDH cards in, awful, and sell them at a premium to locals because, like Moose Loot doesn't have a brick and mortar.
Nope.
Channel's brick and mortar is mostly used for weekly events. Cool Stuff, they've got a brick and mortar kind of.
Yeah.
Star City has a play space, but you can't even have orders there. Like, they have to be delivered. So it's an interesting time to actually have these opportunities as players, because even some of the smaller print run stuff, like promo tokens or judge promos, especially judge promos, the concentration of judges in Europe compared to LGSs is insane. So once those floodgates open, there was a rumor last year that MKM was going to go global.
Yes. They'd set up a website and everything. They had an announcement. It was part of their a quarterly, I believe. You can go back in their news.
Yeah, that's like, oh, we're launching a new global brand. That's something that, if it does happen, that is going to be one of the most drastic things to happen to the market since TCG started.
Yep.
Because there are so many of those old cards over there where people's ability to arbitrage them in is the barrier. Like when Wheel of Fortune was $120 or whatever, you could get FBB wheels for $90 in Europe.
Oh yeah, and those are a premium over here. FBB, anything that's a rare and is playable, is a ridiculous multiplier in the US compared to the EU. Just for those that have never ever worked in the FBB market. Yeah.
It's I think FBB UCs are even now moving at 1100 to 1200, and I can't sell an MP UC for 450.
Yeah.
That's revised.
It's ridiculous.
So, yeah. It's been an interesting thing to see.
Yeah. And this is a really deep topic, so we wanted to cover a lot of top-level information, and we are going to dive into this. It's probably going to be another multi-part episode, but because of what happened this week, where a lot of people were shaken by the fact that Star City Games just reached out into MKM seemingly for no reason, it just kind of created this buzz, and a lot of people soured on the idea of Star City doing this. But they do it every couple of years in a large volume. If you dig back far enough on that subreddit, maybe 2 years ago you'll find another instance where this happened, and they didn't target anything that was super useful. It was the same thing. It's like skull clamp level stuff here.
There was, after Pauper became a thing, they bought, I think, 112 fairy miscreants from us on TCG. Okay, that doesn't mean it's going to spike. It's just them re-upping stock.
And as we wind down the topic of arbitrage, things like this happen all the time, online and in person. Online is just harder to see. Star City Games buys from everybody, as do most other vendors. There are actually vendors from outside of the US, in particular Japan, for games like Yu-Gi-Oh! That reach into the US and buy cards, despite the fact that Konami says you cannot do that, and you cannot play out-of-region cards, meaning North American cards can only be played in North America because they actually do different things than cards in the same exact card in Japan. Same art, different wording. You can't play that. It's two different cards. These companies in Japan still buy out companies like Troll and Toad and various other entities on TCG Player. There's a company in Chicago that kind of represents a large portion of the market now as well. For no reason. And what a lot of people don't see aside from that is this in-person arbitrage that happens at GPs. And a lot of times you don't notice it. You might see like vendors kind of sitting at each other's booths, and that's usually an arbitrage conversation on Saturday or Sunday. They might not be there with a 1 row or a 5 row, but they're talking about like what buys were that weekend and how they can help each other out at the end and see where they can shuffle cards. It's not the same thing as a chop, if people know what that is, at a booth where you're sharing a booth with somebody. It's just like somebody, for instance, Channel Fireball at the GP winds up with a bunch of EDH stock that they know they can't move. So they go to the EDH vendor on site that has that huge presence online or in person, and they will work with them and basically just move that stock back and forth, either for cash or some other stuff. Last year in Toronto, I worked a booth that at the end of the weekend bought a Mox Ruby off another vendor because they couldn't sell it. And it was a near mint unlimited ruby. They just knew they couldn't sell it for a price they wanted, so we bought it for more than they bought it for, tossed it in the case, and brought it home because we know we could. That happens at every GP. This arbitrage opportunity is everywhere all the time, and it works for the little guy and it works for the big guy. You just need to figure out where your avenue is, what your outs are, and what your timeline is going to be. That's the big thing. Like Haruruya ships pretty quickly from Japan. And that's pretty easy arbitrage opportunity, but you gotta like watch that site for the sales that they have.
Especially on like release days when they have, foil Japanese True Name Nemesis for a minute and a half. If you don't get it in that minute and a half, you're not going to, but it's a pretty big arbitrage opportunity.
And the holiday season, sometime in November through the New Year, is generally ridiculous. They've had 50-cent Planeswalker sales, and I've watched the vendor just hit that site and clear out every single Planeswalker on that page. Just bought every one they could, basically as it went live. It's maybe a week and a half for you to get that stuff. That's a very quick churn. You can basically have those cards sold before they get to you. Europe is slower. That's several weeks because you've got to go through at least 2 layers of customs on the way in and on the way out. And you've got to have that connection to an individual through MKM. That's actually one of the harder parts, unless you want to try and set up a forwarding address through any number of services.
But it's definitely, and the thing to look out for with the vendor-to-vendor sales, Sunday afternoon, after the first booth starts packing up, you'll see people leave from behind booths and go to another booth. And they'll sit there and they'll just have the conversation, like you said. And it's, that's the finalize. Because what we used to do is we'd go on early Saturday or late Friday. Hey, guys, what's your stuff you need? Because we have a bunch of stuff we can't get rid of. Let's help each other out. And you just work something out like, all right, here's the broad strokes. We'll meet up again Sunday, iron it out. And that's when that type of stuff happens. And you'll see, like you said, sometimes they don't have anything in their hands. They don't have a 1 row. They don't have a 5 row. It's not until the end of the day that you'll see all of a sudden they're carrying 6 5 rows over filled with bulk rares.
That's the one.
That they paid 5 cents for, and they're offloading for 8 cents. Fine. And that's when you see it a lot. So it's definitely there. It's just knowing you're out in your timeline, and those are the 2 big things.
And keeping in mind that this is an opportunity for everyone, and the timeline is different for everyone in each card. And that's definitely something we are going to cover as this comes up, and we can dedicate more than just the 30 or so minutes to it. This is just this kind of shakeup that happened again in the community, and we really wanted to touch on it and kind of open up the eyes of everybody who just kind of thought this was something inappropriate or something that shouldn't happen, and just kind of clear the air on it. But with that, we're pretty much ready to go, so we might as well just throw some picks out there for this week. So I originally, this week, wanted to go with a card that I thought would see more, not play necessarily, but a little more, I guess a few more wins on the SCG circuit in Tempest Jin. Because Alexander Hayne had this ridiculous run this week if you heard about it at all, he played the mono blue tempo list from last standard season over the past couple, not the past couple days, for a few days this week. Reached a number 1 ranking. Held it for close to maybe it's 16 to 24 hours.
Yeah.
While he was just away from the game, just held it for that long. Nobody could get close to him. So I was, Tempest Jin is one of the only rares in that deck. It is a 4 of in that deck, but then I just kind of watched it get dunked on in a lot of videos. So I backed off of that, and instead I went with something that I think is a little underrated at the moment, but shouldn't be, in Search for Iskanta. So this card is in every non-tempo based deck right now that is base blue. We are at just about the lowest price point in this card's history, short of the first couple months of its release.
Yeah.
We are actually at a point where it's cheaper now than it was almost a year ago. And this card is all over the standard format.
Yeah.
And I can't figure out why it's just roping right now. Everywhere. It's not like this card is a 2 of or a 3 of in a few decks. The only thing that comes to mind is the fact that right now the decks that take full advantage of this are Nexus decks. And not a lot of people can actually buy into that deck because of the prohibitive price on Nexus itself. Or they don't want to buy into a deck that they think is going to get banned in the next couple of weeks. So you'll hold off. Nexus keeps down other control decks aside from the Esper control deck right now. There's no Jeskai control deck. There's no Blue-Eye control deck anymore. There's not even a Teamer control deck floating around that is doing well. They exist, but they're not doing well. So if Nexus disappears from the format, where this card is basically a 4 of in that list, we're going to watch the control aspects of the standard format kind of broaden, and more people begin to move into those strategies. They're not just stuck to Esper, which might not be a color pairing they dislike. They get the opportunity to blow people up with Teamer, Expansion Explosion, and Wilderness Reclamation. And you get more opportunities to pair these 2 cards together, Wilderness Reclamation and Search for Iskanta. The only Simic deck out there right now, pure Simic in the Star City field, is a Simic Nexus deck.
Yeah.
That's it. And it uses both of these cards to great effect, yes, and Krasis. But that's not a wide control field that can prop up this card and this price. Even with Scarab Lord in the format, this card was, I think, played at a less percentage metagame share, but saw a much higher price point.
Yeah.
By about $5 to $10. This card, at that point, wasn't in Modern yet. Jeskai Control and Blue-Eye Control weren't really playing this card. It didn't have this eternal format kind of standing.
Yeah.
If people are holding out on this because of rotation in the fall, that's fine.
Maybe it's the Challenger decks. They're afraid that's going to go in. But looking at the price history on MTG stocks, it hasn't, it's low for the last 2 months.
Yeah.
Was $8, and right now its low is like 11 to 12. That's not a huge. That doesn't say Challenger deck to me.
No.
That just says it hit a low.
Yeah, people aren't buying this card anymore. We're in this plateau period where nobody's really moving in on this card. There might be some movement behind the scenes, but there's not a rush to it.
Yeah.
So, quote unquote, everybody that wants to play this card might own it, but I really don't think that's the case. Nexus pops up, it's great. The Nexus decks just kind of win. It doesn't matter if you're on Gates, if you're on Simic, if you're on something else that plays Nexus.
Yeah.
They're great. But that's not a lot of control player style. They don't want to play this weird combo deck that just steals people's time. They want to play a control deck that they feel comfortable in, and right now that's only Esper.
Yeah.
And you might not have a Blue-Eye player that wants to play Esper. You might not have a Jeskai player that wants to play Esper, etc. The number of decks that are viable with this card are really narrow right now. So if Nexus gets banned, this card can broaden its horizon, so to speak, be in multiple control decks, and we'll see it go up. How much this card holds in the long term, in a non-foil version, just a set foil, I don't know. I feel like $15 might be a little high for this card unless it starts seeing legacy play.
Yeah.
So if I had to guess, this is going to be a short-term hold, probably between the next 3 and 6 months is going to be your entry point and where you want to get out.
Yeah.
I can see $20, $25 if Control actually does take over the format and Nexus goes away, or Nexus just doesn't go away and then the entire field becomes Nexus with Search for Iskanta. The door goes both ways on this, and I think at no point in time does Search for Escanto remain a $15 card during this entire process.
Yeah. I also think it was Nassif who said he thought the best card in the blue-white lists in Modern was Jace. I firmly believe it's Search. I think Search is a much better card advantage engine for that deck, and I think that long term, especially, it's started to see some play in Miracles lists in Legacy.
Yep.
And I think as that continues, because this could be Teferi, this could see Vintage play, and those like the 3 to 4 color control lists, I could see this in Vintage. So I think it's a little undervalued. I know you said, it doesn't stay 15. I think it gets to 20 to 25 long term is where it ends up.
My problem with that number is the fact that there's not the buy a box promo, the standard showdown version. And because there's that like incredibly pimp version of this card, I think that's going to depress the price of the non-foil version overall.
That's fair, yeah.
And keep it a little low. But there's something I want to check on, because I know it's in Miracles in Legacy, but I want to see if it's not paired with accumulate knowledge. That seems criminal.
It's not.
Ah, that's silly.
I know, right?
All right. But yeah, to validate your point, the last time I played Blue-White Control in Modern was after Hollow 1 and the Vengevine version of that deck became big, and I was playing a version with a lot of tuck, and keeping a Search for Escanta unflipped was actually extremely good in a lot of those matchups, because I could just dig to exactly the card I needed instead of just and keep tapping out to play 4, 5, and 6 mana spells without having to hold up the 3 for my Anticipate.
For sure, yeah.
Or not Anticipate, my Impulse.
Yeah. So for me, I'm actually... Coverage sucks, so you've got to look elsewhere to get your deck lists. Andrew Ellenbogen posted his Experimental Friendsfinity deck. That's what I'm going with. Deal with it.
Okay.
And it looks really good. He went 12-3 for 11th place. And he said, especially against Blue-Red Phoenix, the card was insane. Which, as much as Blue-Red Phoenix has been popping up lately, I think is really important.
Yep.
And he also went with a Singleton Master of Ethereum. So my pick is actually not Master of Ethereum. It's Experimental Frenzy. Right now, the card is sub $2.
Yep.
I think it's a $4 to $5 card, especially as Modern starts to take off more and we get to non-limited events for the next 6 months, hopefully. I mean, I know most of the Magic Fests are limited, but Star City, as well as the constructed events we do have that are GPs, tend to be Modern. I think we have one Standard and the rest are Modern.
I think so too, yeah.
I just think it's really well positioned right now, financially and meta-wise. Affinity's one of those decks that you've got your general sideboard for, your general sideboard hate of Stony Silence or whatever your color gives you access to, but it still gets there. And I think Experimental Frenzy being added to this deck, and we touched on it in a previous episode, really gives this deck a late game. And that's kind of been the problem with Affinity, is you either dump your whole hand on one, or
you're done.
You're done.
Yeah.
And this gives you that late game staying power because it's so good for card advantage. And I think, realistically, a $4 to $5 in the next year. So it's a bit more of like for me, a mid to late term hold. But I think if you can get it in a trade for like $1, do it. Absolutely. If you've got an LGS that does bulk rares at $1 and this is in the box, do it. I don't think it's bad for sub 2.
No, I don't.
But
I don't think so either.
It's just definitely, to me, a $4 to $5 card.
Yeah. The fact that it has play in Modern already, and there has been some legacy testing with this already in the Mono Red Storm deck.
Yeah.
Leads me to believe that it won't just be EDH propping up this price long term. Unlike Sunbird's Invocation, which is another very win off the top kind of card. The Experimental Frenzy is a little bit better than that.
Yeah. It's a color that doesn't have card advantage.
Yeah.
Just doesn't. And like you said, I just think that's really good for it. So
yeah, I agree, and I think it was not on coverage this week in the Star City. It hasn't been in the Mono Red list in a while, so price depression based on that. It's a $2 card. Whether this picks up in standard, don't know, but it's going to either keep being a rope at between $2 and $3 until it rotates, or it'll pop again. And you got to figure out whether you want it now or you want to try and get it later. And if this is actually going to be a modern card, this might not be something that drops at Guilds of Rav rotation in 18 months or whenever it leaves.
Yeah.
If Modern and Legacy can hold this card up, we're not going to see it any cheaper than $2 once it rotates. So, sooner rather than later on this card, and I definitely think it's a good long-term hold. It's not going to be hard to move this card at any point in time, just because it does yell EDH pretty loudly.
Yeah, it does for sure. But all right, guys, that's it. Thanks for tuning in. You can find me at Thirsty Sizzler on Twitter.
I am Reptar. We can be found at MtG Cabalcast on Twitter and also on Patreon. The Discord is up and running. We tossed our first set of show notes up there this week with our picks. And you guys should really think about coming to join us.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next week.
See you.